Hello, good morning, afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from today. Thank you so much for joining us at the Work Wellness Institute for today's webinar, The Experience of Employees with Disabilities. My name is Elizabeth White, and I am the team lead of Learning and Development with the Work Wellness Institute, and I'll be helping to host and moderate today's webinar. I would like to start by acknowledging that I have the privilege to live and work on the traditional and ancestral and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. We would like to take a quick moment and thank our academic team and our 9 founding partner organizations in the Harnessing Talent Project, Harnessing Talent Alliance for Recruiting and Retaining Canadians with Disabilities and Mental Health Challenges, which is a multi-year project funded by Employment and Social Development Canada. This webinar is made possible through the support of ESDC, as well as memberships to WWI, the Work Wellness Institute, and we always would like to thank our advisory committee and of course our speakers who contribute to this webinar series and whom without we couldn't have a series, so thank you so much to all that participate. Just a few technical housekeeping points to get out of the way at the top of this webinar, as I see a few more are joining us today. Hopefully at this point you're both able to see me as well as the title presentation slide through your computer or phone, depending if you chose to dial in today. We do ask that participants remain muted, which will happen through GoToWebinar naturally. And if you're looking on how to communicate with us today, you will just simply go to the GoToWebinar menu, which hopefully you're seeing on your screen, and you'll see that there's a questions label, and that is your chat box with us today. So we do encourage that throughout the session, if you have any questions, please send them through, as we will and are more than happy to address questions in time with the presentation. But we do also have a dedicated question and answer period at the end of the session if that's when you're able to come up with some questions. So just don't hesitate. Please use the questions box as soon as you have a thought or question you would like our presenter today to address. If you're experiencing any technical issues, that's also your best way to communicate with us, and we'll hopefully get you up and running as soon as possible. If one of the questions that might be coming top of mind of what's happening at the end of the webinar, there is an FAQ I'll also point out in the handout section of the GoToWebinar that addresses some of those questions. But also, as always, this webinar will be sent, the recording will be sent through to all participants, as well as presentation materials, and it will go to our website in eCampus for access post the event. So not to worry, you will receive materials post session. Just a quick note to our members, for our WWI Work Wellness Institute individual members, just a reminder that you will receive an automatic certificate after your attendance today. All right, let's move into the main event of what has gathered us all here together, and we're so very excited to have Dr. Lynn Cook with us today. Lynn is a professor of rehabilitation counseling in the counselor education program at the University of Arkansas and has been there since 2006. Prior to joining the University of Arkansas faculty, she served as the coordinator of the Rehabilitation Counseling Program at Kent State University and was a faculty member in the Center for Disability Studies for 10 years. A nationally certified rehabilitation counselor, Lynn received her bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Arizona and her doctorate from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her most prominent research interest is the vocational and psychosocial implications of emerging disabilities, and she has also authored and co-authored many publications, including professional journal articles, book chapters, and 2 books. Thank you so much, Lynn, for joining us today, and I'm so looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you for having me. This is a topic I am very passionate about. Before I get started, I do want to acknowledge the co-investigators who worked with me on the study that I'm going to be presenting the findings to you all from. My co-investigators are Rachel Glade, who is from our Communications Disorder Program, Christine Mano, Atin Zadam, Lauren Simon, and Chris Rosen, who are from our School of Business. And then also Philip Rumrill, who is from the University of Kentucky and is a rehabilitation counseling professor himself. So as you can see, we had a pretty interdisciplinary team to investigate the topic of workplace treatment of employees with disabilities. So I just want to give you an outline of what we're going to cover today, and hopefully we'll get through all of it and we'll have lots of time for discussion. First of all, I want to talk to you about the purpose of the research and how we recruited participants. Then I'm going to go into research methods, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that topic because I really want to get into the meat of this presentation, which is our research findings. And I've included at the end of the presentation the reference for the article where you can go to if you are interested in learning more about our research methods. So the key research findings were the types of workplace treatment that participants in our study experienced, the emotional toll of those who experienced mistreatment, how employees responded to mistreatment, what the outcomes of their reports to mistreatment were to HR or supervisors, and then finally their desire for a sense of belongingness. These are the key findings. And then I would like to, at the end, to talk to you about what you see as the overall theme of the study, because that was our purpose, but I would like to get your input on that. And then you can read our article to see what we discovered or as the overall theme. And I'd also like to leave it open for any questions that you all have. So I became really interested in workplace treatment of people with disabilities from my prior experience as a rehabilitation counselor who worked with people with disabilities to help them to achieve and maintain employment. And some of the experiences I learned from them, also the experience I have learned from other research participants. And then finally, some of my reading that other scholars have done where they've just looked at workplace treatment in the general workforce, and they found that a large majority of employees have experienced some form of workplace mistreatment over their careers. So the purpose of this study was to look at how workers with disabilities are treated on the job. Then we looked at the types of mistreatment, if any, that they experienced in the workplace, what the consequences of that mistreatment were for individuals who did experience it, if there were any experiences of workplace mistreatment, what courses of action they took when they experienced mistreatment, if they took any courses, and their satisfaction with the outcomes of the actions that they did take. So recruitment. We did a grounded theory investigation, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that when we go into research methods. But primarily what we did was we interviewed 26 individuals with disabilities about their experiences in the workplace. And so we used a convenience sampling to recruit our participants. And what that involved was recruiting from a variety of different sources, such as our personal contacts, snowball sampling, which is a technique where you ask research participants to identify anyone else they know that might be interested in participating in the study. We also hand-delivered or emailed a recruitment flyer to various organizations that provide disability or health care services in our community, which is Fayetteville, Arkansas. Convenience sampling means basically we recruited to get anyone who is interested in participating in the study. But again, we did want to have a heterogeneous group of participants who had a range of disabilities, who had diverse demographic characteristics, and were employed in a variety of occupations. In order to participate in our study, participants were required to have a self-reported disability or chronic illness and to be currently employed. and they could be employed either part-time or full-time. For each participant that participated in the study, we did provide them with $40 in cash for their time at the end of the interview. And there were four of us who conducted the interviews. So our research methods, and again, I'll go through this rather quickly, and you can ask questions at the end or go to our article if you want more specifics on our techniques. But we used a grounded theory approach to interview 26 employees with disabilities about their experiences. And in grounded theory, it's a qualitative approach to research where you go into the study without any theories. The idea is that the theory emerges from the data you collect, which is the words, the experience that the research participants tell us about. So the theory actually emerges from the study, and we try to set aside any of our assumptions and predispositions that might bias us. So the main data source was a semi-structured interview protocol that we as a research team developed. We looked at different interview questions that were asked in other studies on workplace mistreatment. And we talked about what we really wanted to learn from the participants. The overarching interview question for the study was, we are interested in learning about how employees with disabilities are treated in the job. Could you please describe how you are treated at your job? We also asked two additional questions. Do you think there's anything about your condition that influences the way people treat you on the job? And is there anything else you would like to share about your experiences? Because we may not have asked questions that were really important to them. And we wanted to make sure, again, that the data emerged from their experiences. So we wanted to get as in-depth and what word we use in qualitative research, rich data, so that we could get a really good understanding of the participants' experiences. We also asked probing questions and follow-up questions such as, can you tell me more about that? Or can you give me an example of that? We use grounded theory data analysis procedures, which involve constant comparison of your data, open, axial, and selective coding, which I will not go into, but basically you start very broadly and then you break apart your data and then you put it together again so that you've developed some type of theory that's emerged from the experiences that your participants have shared with you. In qualitative research, it's really important that we address the issue of trustworthiness, and that's so that we can ensure that what we're reporting is not what we as the researchers think, but what the research participants tell us. So in qualitative research and in grounded theory research in particular, we function really in the role as learners, and we're there to learn from the participants' experiences. And so we use these different techniques, researcher reflexivity, where we're constantly, thinking about our own biases, and journaling and talking about them with the research team so that those don't taint our results. We use memos where we, at every meeting that we had, we wrote down our thoughts about emerging themes or about where we may have been biased, and we challenge each other as research team members. We used audit trails where we kept detailed notes about everything we did, member checks where we shared the transcripts. Each interview was transcribed verbatim with permission from the participants. And we shared the transcripts with the participants to see if they wanted to add on or take away anything from the transcripts. We also, when we began to develop our themes, we shared those with several of the participants who said they were interested to have their input. We also looked for discrepant data. Whenever you start to see a theme, you look for data that does not fit within that theme. And then we used triangulation across researchers from multiple disciplines. And we used triangulation across multiple research approaches. We triangulated all of our own memos and notes along with the research or the literature that's already out there on treatment of people in the workplace, and along with our conversations as we met as research team members. So let's talk about characteristics of our participants. Interestingly, more than half of the 26 participants reported that they had multiple disabilities, meaning they had 2 or more disabilities. Half of the participants, also interestingly, had psychiatric disabilities, and all but one had disabilities that were invisible. However, some of these disabilities did become apparent when individuals were symptomatic on the job. For example, one individual had a seizure while he was at work, and another participant or a couple of participants had panic attacks on the job. And in that way, it made their disabilities visible to their coworkers, supervisors, etc. Of the participants, 19 were female. The age range was from 18 to 24, which included 10 participants in that age range. 25 to 30, there was 1 participant in that age range. 31 to 40, we had 5 participants. 41 to 50, we had 5 participants. 51 to 60, we had 1 participant, and 61 and older, we had 4 participants. So we did have participants who ranged in age, but the largest number of participants were from 18 to 24, which is a limitation of our research. And I think we got the majority of participants from our own center that provides accommodations for students with disabilities at our university. So the sample included 19 Caucasians, 6 African Americans, and 1 participant who reported being multiracial, and that includes Latinx, Native American, and Alaskan Native. So that gives you some characteristics of our participants. And I think what it's really interesting to note is that more than half of them did have multiple disabilities, which is not unusual when you look at people with disabilities. And half of the participants had psychiatric disabilities, and all but 1 had invisible disabilities, which I think is really interesting. And we know it's oftentimes more difficult to accommodate people who have invisible disabilities. And it's also can be very challenging for individuals who have invisible disabilities to determine whether or not they want to disclose their disabilities and request accommodations, because many times these invisible disabilities have a lot of stigma attached to them. So some other characteristics of the participants, in terms of duration of employment, and we looked at the duration, and it ranged from 2 months to 51 years. The mean number of years of employment was 7. Participants reported holding hourly positions. That was 1 participant. Full-time, 7 participants. Part-time, 13 participants. And self-employment, we had 5 participants. And again, I think the majority had part-time employment because they were students at the university who were working and going to school. So this would introduce another limitation to our study. So if you were to recruit from the community and not at a university, you might see different participant characteristics. Of the participants, 8 were employed in entry-level jobs, and we define entry-level jobs as positions that generally did not require a degree and in which the employee had no supervisory responsibilities. 7 were employed in mid-level employment jobs, and we describe these as positions that may require an associate degree or some type of technical training or higher, and intermediate skills with some supervisory responsibilities. 10 of the participants were employed in professional level jobs, and we describe these as highly skilled positions, which oftentimes require a college degree or some advanced technical training. And 1 participant was employed in upper level management, and this participant was also self-employed and a business owner. 4 participants who listed more than 1 job, the position that we categorized at the highest level was used to determine their employment level. And I have included in the reference and resources list, and I'll talk about that later, but another study that we conducted where we were looking at participants' perspectives on how to improve disability inclusion in the workplace. And in that study, we report the occupations they were employed in. So you can refer to that study for the occupational categories of the participants. So now we want to get into the meat of our findings. Interestingly, only 2 participants reported that they had never experienced workplace mistreatment. One of the participants was already employed and had already demonstrated that she was a valued hard worker who took her job very seriously. And so she did not have any problems with workplace mistreatment when she required some, leave time and some accommodations, because according to her, she had already demonstrated that she was a valued employee. And also she worked in a department. She was an instructor at the university, and her department was very accommodating to her. And so she also attributed it to the people that she worked with. The other participant indicated that he had demonstrated also his value as a worker, and he placed his focus on his work primarily and his disabilities secondarily. And he was able in many cases to self-accommodate. He was employed by a large international organization in IT. And so he believed that his organization and also the way he conducted himself in his position attributed to the fact that he didn't experience any mistreatment. And also interestingly, though, is the two employees that reported no mistreatment, they also indicated that they believed that in some way their situations were unique. Both of them said that they did not believe that other people with their conditions had the same experiences and may have experienced more workplace mistreatment. And so they did acknowledge that in some way they felt their experiences of being treated so well on the job were unique. 2 types of mistreatment were reported, and that was overt mistreatment that is more in line with It's more in line with the type of mistreatment that is unlawful under the Americans with Disabilities Act and its amendments. And I understand in Canada you have an act as well. Can you tell me the name of your act that protects the rights of employees with disabilities?
We have a few. There's also provincial ones. So we have the Accessibility Act for Ontario. We do have a Human Rights Act throughout Canada. We have several that
Okay,
that are both federally and provincially run.
okay, thank you.
No problem.
I want to get into the really important part of the study, and that was what our research findings were. And before we really get into what the findings were, I do want to discuss examples of both overt mistreatment and more subtle mistreatment that were experienced by the employees. And these are anything that's bolded and highlighted is a direct quote from a research participant to represent our findings. So, as one example, when a participant requested a brief unscheduled break as an accommodation that she had already received, she said, "I need to sit down for a minute," to her supervisor. And the response was, "You need to wait another hour for a break." As a result of failure to provide this simple accommodation, the participant reported that her symptoms were getting worse and worse over the hour, and then 10 minutes isn't enough, and she ends up having a panic attack. In response to an accommodation request, one participant was told, "Not my problem," and deal with it. So you can see these are outright discriminatory responses from supervisors. Another participant indicated that they do tend to make fun of me because I think out loud. So they think I'm talking to myself and they make fun of me for that. They refers to two of the participants' managers, had their kids stay and watch me until I'll start to talk myself. Anyone that sees me, then whoever they can tell about it and get to come and watch it. So this participant talked out loud as a way to self-accommodate, and as you can see, was made fun of, was taunted, was laughed at, which to me is just almost horrific and unbelievable that adults would act that way, and especially managers would bring their children in to watch this participant as he talked out loud while he worked. So that, I think, to me is an example of overt harassment, which is unlawful under the Americans with Disabilities Act. As another example that I did not include in here, one participant was actually assaulted. A guy smacked him in the back of the head. This participant did report it to his supervisor, and his supervisor told them that yes, he would deal with it. However, what we need to think about is, even though supervisors and HR may be very accommodating, sometimes the accommodations they provide may lead to further mistreatment by coworkers, because now that this individual has reported this mistreatment, and this is not what he told us, but this has happened in other cases. The employee who was called in by the manager may have talked with other employees, and so the employees may have isolated this participant, avoided him, which leads to other forms of workplace mistreatment. So we do need to think about that. And as another example, we had a participant in the study and who had a very supportive supervisor who was always checking in on her and how she was doing. However, the other employees stated to her that they felt like she was receiving favoritism from per supervisor. So that's, I think, a very important finding, that just because supervisors, HR may be accommodating doesn't mean that coworkers are going to be accommodating, and that they are going to treat participants or workers with individuals with disabilities with dignity and respect.
I'm just going to flag about 15 minutes until we would move to question and answer.
Okay, great. So types of workplace mistreatment, some subtle mistreatment. A group of coworkers hung out. I got kind of left alone. I was never someone they spoke to on break. I never felt part of the group. I felt very much on the outside. I never got invited out when they planned, to go out after work for, happy hour or whatever. Or going to lunch. When I'm not doing well, I seem obviously strange. And so people get kind of freaked out about that. And then after that, it's kind of like a silent tension working around me, and they're worried, and people kind of subconsciously isolate me in a work environment after that happens a lot of times. And then finally, having a disability is enough of an obstacle in and of itself, but to insinuate that it's an excuse not to do the job the way they feel it should be done isn't fair. I think one of the most compelling findings of our study is the emotional toll that workplace mistreatment took on employees. And these are just some examples of what they said. It shakes my self-confidence in my abilities. Maybe I really am screwed up. I look forward to getting out of the house and being able to work, but at the same time, I get discouraged when I'm here. It's like fight or flight. We just kind of hunker down and we battle ourselves inside of our heads to pull through it. And people expect us to stay there and continue to battle it. When it's peers, there's more of them, so it's more likely something will arise eventually. And it's just a slow build. And then once it feels like a mountain, then it's just too much for me. And some more quotes on the emotional toll of mistreatment. I was totally demeaned. And then some people who experienced a couple of situations over their careers, and these were older workers. Those are the situations that I don't think I will ever forget. I think that when I'm retired, I think that I will still think back on a couple of years that were really hard. And it still bothers me to this day that someone told me that I'm not smart enough to do my job. And whenever I'm having trouble with doing a task, it comes back to haunt me. These experiences still cause me a lot of grief, and I have ill feelings. Those two situations in which an employee was mistreated still stand out and really haunt me. So you can see how, emotionally impactful and devastating these experiences can be. So we asked people about what they did in response to mistreatment. And it was interesting that many people did nothing. And so some examples. One participant said, you just grin and bear it. Another participant said, you try to fly under the radar. Participants who didn't report mistreatment to supervisors or to HR stated their reasons as, I fear backlash, or I was really upset about it, but I didn't confront the coworkers because I, have a thing about confrontation. And I just didn't want to get that started at work because I feel like it would just make the situation more tense. So it's just festering. And also another participant stated not wanting to ruffle any feathers. So there were, even though people may know that they're protected by the law, they don't want to, report mistreatment for a variety of reasons. And these are a few examples. For those who did report mistreatment to supervisors or HR, here's some of the outcomes of what their reports were. While some stated they were satisfied, other employees who reported workplace mistreatment were not satisfied with what the outcomes were. Every time you bring it up or you try to have a meeting about it, you're upset. they're like, oh, you're seeing it wrong, or you're thinking wrong. Don't think like that. So in other words, they're told that, oh, you're not being mistreated on the job. It's all in your head. Another one said, I was put on hold when they called HR to report an incident. They said they were put on hold for 45 minutes with one person, and it seemed like that's what they're doing. They were trying to make it longer so they did not have to take the complaint. So she felt that they were trying to discourage anyone from complaining. And another person said that after she had reported mistreatment, they started treating me with kid gloves. They started treating me a little bit more delicately, like I'm some kind of special needs person. If I catch them treating me differently, I call them on it. So at least she did stand up for herself, but still being treated like this, as you can imagine, is not the way anyone would want to be treated on the job. So participants that did report, a positive experiences, what they were really indicating was the most important thing to them was a desire for a sense of belongingness, not being an outsider or a freak, or that special needs person or that person with a disability. And so some examples of what people had to say about that were, I'm treated like everyone else. No one pays heed to my disability. I'm expected to work and perform the same as everyone else. So this person is not treated in any way specially or differently from their coworkers as it relates to their workplace productivity. I feel like I've been treated more than fairly with my disability. I've never had any issues or adverse repercussions or anything. I don't feel like I've ever been held back. I've been promoted. I don't feel like I've ever been treated as special or that it's given me a leg up. Anything I've done has been based off of merit, I'll say, and not in any way related positively or negatively to my disability. And this was the individual who worked for the international organization in IT and was very satisfied with the way he was treated on the job. And he also indicated that I wish that people outside of my workplace would treat me that way, because he had tics, and sometimes he said he would be in line, at the Walmart, which is really big out here, and because this is where it was started and the Waltons are from. But he said people would, laugh at him, make fun of him sometimes when he was in line at the Walmart to pay for his purchases, and that he wished everybody would treat him as well as people treated him on the job. Another person indicated, and this was a person who experienced negative treatment and positive treatment, but in one position that she described, she said there's more of a family-friendly atmosphere. I can go to my boss's boss and ask for a cornbread recipe as much as a medical leave. Both would be accepted generously. As another example, I've been treated just about the best that I could ever have been treated for a person with my kind of disability. And then finally, it's another luck of the draw if they have enough empathy to be able to understand what it's like. And so, being empathic on the job is very important. And this person had experiences of jobs where that was not the case and jobs where that was the case. And so people really want to feel that they belong, and that they are not treated differently because they have a disability. I did want to share with you a few references and resources. The first one is by the Employer Assistance and Resource Network on Disability Inclusion, and I've included where you can find that, but it's called Inclusion at Work, a framework for building a disability inclusive organization. The second one is another study that we did with the same research team, where it is, and the same research participants, where we asked them to describe to us what an inclusive workplace environment looks like and what can be done to make workplace environments more inclusive to people with disabilities. And that the lead author on that study was Rachel Glade, and it's called Recommendations from Employees with Disabilities for Creating Inclusive Workplaces. And then the Job Accommodation Network has a workplace accommodation toolkit, Building Your Inclusive Workplace. Job Accommodation Network is a really useful resource, and I don't know if you have something similar where you all are located, but anyone can use this, and this resource is really wonderful for anyone who wants to look at creating an environment in their own workplace that is more inclusive of people with disabilities. And then finally, I've included the article that this presentation is based off. I think I can send a copy of that to the organizers of the presentation if you all would like to see that. So now what I would like to do is open this up for discussion. And I have two questions for you all. What is the overarching theme that you see emerging from the participants' responses? And the themes that we came up with, what kind of ties all this together? And how can disability service providers, employees with disabilities, and workplace organizations work together to create work environments that are inclusive and ensure that employees with disabilities are treated with dignity and respect? And then, you know, I'm open at any time to other questions or comments that you all have. So I think that we have enough time to have a nice conversation, and I'd like to open it up to that now.
So I'll kind of let people start typing in kind of the questions that you've posed, and I'll get to a couple of questions that did just come in around the research itself, and just one of the questions wanting a little bit of clarification of what the self-reported disability meant. So is that someone that's self-diagnosed, or is that a medical diagnosis? Just wanting a little clarification on that.
Yes, we did not ask for, you know, a medical proof of a medical diagnosis. We just, when we were doing our recruitment, we just said we wanted to talk with people who had disabilities or chronic illnesses, because oftentimes people with chronic illnesses don't define themselves as having disabilities. And so we did not seek any verification. We just based it on their own self-reports. And they also, we had a demographic form that they had to complete, and they reported on that form what their disability was.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification. And that came to another demographic question that's come in. When you mentioned that demographic form, you gave so much great information around the participants, but in terms of geography, you might have touched on this a little, but was that specifically in the area, or was it national? Just a little curiosity about that.
Good question. Yes, this study was just conducted in Fayetteville, Arkansas, although we may have had some participants who were from surrounding areas. So I would say it would be limited to Northwest Arkansas, which again is another limitation of our study. It would be very interesting to conduct this study, for example, in Canada, in the different places that you live. But because it was a qualitative study, we were just looking at participants in our area. And again, to duplicate this study in other parts of the United States, other parts of the world, I think would be really interesting to see if the findings are similar or if they are different.
Absolutely, because experience and geography, it's just something as geography can totally change someone's experience, right? So
Mhm, absolutely, yes.
that would be definitely interesting. Another quick demographic clarification, in terms of the employers themselves and size, was that something that
Mhm.
was looked at in terms of large versus small? And did you find anything, any difference in experience related to the size of the organization?
No, because that was not one of our research questions. We did report the eh, the we didn't look specifically at the employer size. Sometimes this was brought up again because we wanted our findings to emerge from the participants.
Hmm.
But there have been many studies done that on uh, looking at the ADA and discrimination claims, where they did analyze employer size. And if you go to McMahon, MCMAHON, they had a big research grant and they were working with researchers from all over the US and I think some in Canada too. And so one of the studies that they did was looking at discrimination and employer characteristics. But that was not really something that we were interested in looking at this
This particular.
we were just looking at how people were treated in general. But yes, research has been done, and that is a question, you could include that. If you replicated the study, you could, certainly ask that in a demographic questionnaire, the size of the employer, and then add in a question if you wanted to, do you think the size of your employer matters? I do want to make note that one of the two participants, actually both of the participants who reported no mistreatment, one of them worked for a university and the other worked for a large international company.
Hmm. Yeah, something to think about for sure.
Mhm.
So, coming in, we have a question and then a theme and a question from people. So I'll just kind of go through here. I'm curious about the individual that had established their value to the organization before disclosing their disability. Did you find, or were there any differences in responses from employers to longer term employers that then disclosed disabilities versus those people that were newly hired and disclosed kind of right up front?
We did not look at that in particular. We did find, as I said, that the two individuals, and again, this is, part of qualitative research. We're not looking at making generalization outside of our study. We're just
Hmm.
looking at what the participants in our study had to say. But can you repeat what the question was again?
Yeah, no, for sure. So I guess it was looking at, were there any answers that did come from the participants that maybe differed in experience when they'd already kind of proven themselves to the
Yes.
organization before they disclosed versus someone that just came in and disclosed right away. So they're a new hire
Yes.
disclosing a disability versus someone who's been there a while, proven, quote, their value, and then disclosed
Mhm.
kind of as a longer term employee.
Yes. As I mentioned, one of the participants who didn't report any mistreatment on the job, uh, she was already working at the time at the onset of her disability, and she had indeed, demonstrated to them that she was a really valued employee, and she always got great evaluations from her supervisor. Students loved her, and so I think because she had demonstrated her value to her employer um, before the onset of her disability and the need for accommodations, that they were more than happy to, work with her and to provide her the accommodations she needed. So that would be a really interesting separate study to do, I think.
Mm.
And the other individual, I think a lot of it was his attitude combined with, and this is part of what we thought was the overall theme, but it was partly his attitude that he was going to demonstrate his value to, you know, as a worker, and that was going to be his main focus. He, interestingly, was the only one who had a noticeable disability. He had Tourette's syndrome. And so he, for example, talked about a lot of the accommodations he made he made himself. And so, for example, if he was in a meeting, one of his the symptoms of his Tourette's was that he would, shake his head sometimes. And so if someone would be talking and he would be shaking his head and they would look at him kind of strangely, he would tell them, "Oh, I'm not disagreeing with you. This is just a symptom of my Tourette's." So, he not only was he really focused not so much on his disability and requesting accommodation, but he was focused on really demonstrating his value to the organization. And so he attributed, that both to himself and to working for an organization that was really disability inclusive. And that was, again, the large international employer.
Right. That also speaks to kind of that conversation of how it can be quite a collaborative process. And so some self-accommodation, self-management, as well as what workplaces can do. So it's hopefully a collaborative discussion on best approaches, right?
Absolutely. And interestingly, when we asked the participants, what can be done to create more inclusive workplaces, they did talk about, well, we need, these collaborative approaches that involve input from people with disabilities. And in this context, they were looking overall, not just at their own need for accommodations, but the collaborative approach of working with employers to advise them or be part of an advisory group on how to create workplaces where people with disabilities are treated with dignity and respect.
Oh, that's actually a great bridge into something, and you might have already answered it, but just curious if there was anything to add when thinking about all of that, mistreatment that you did mention, both the overt and the not, and the sense of belonging. All of those things, was there anything that was said or came up in the answers that would aid in that perhaps goes beyond that policy work, right? Like you can assume that most employers have policies around discrimination and how we treat one another and all of those things, but then these treatments still happen or mistreatments still happen. So just interesting if there's anything to add there from what you just described of advisory groups, etc.
Yes. Well, some of the participants, when we did ask them the question about, what can be done to create more inclusive workplace environments, brought that actual point up. They said, well, there are policies in place, but a lot of people are not aware of these policies. And so a lot of individuals said these policies need to be discussed when you're hiring people, every time that you have a meeting with coworkers, in every publication, that the organization puts forth, whether that might be employee manuals or whatever, it has to be emphasized over and over again. And even in the hiring process, which many employers already do, but not just in the hiring process, but it needs to be constantly reinforced and put at the top of the list of, some of the what do you call it? What's important, or the organization values that we are inclusive and that we do provide accommodations to people with disabilities, and we do not tolerate any form of mistreatment against people with disabilities.
I definitely think that's a great point to consider because, as you mentioned, I think there's a lot of onboarding practices that exist to ensure those policies are read, they're aware of, but to kind of keep that as a constant thing that's a part of the discussion really helps take those words off of the page, right, and puts it into,
Yes,
yeah, yeah, wonderful.
yes. It's
Uh,
constantly reinforcing that this is a really important, value or mission of our organization.
Absolutely. So looking at the time, I'm just going to squeeze in a last question from our participants today, around, do you think that people with visible disabilities are more accepted or experience less accommodation challenges than people with invisible disabilities? And curious what maybe came up in your research and answers from participants around the difference experience between their visible versus invisible disabilities.
Yes, I think that's a really interesting question. And I thought about that because, as I said, the majority of our participants had invisible disabilities. We did not get a lot of participants in the study who had visible disabilities. So that would be a really interesting study to do, to look at, people with visible disabilities and how they're treated on the job. But because we did not have many people with disabilities, at all in our study, I can't really answer that question. Some of the participants did say they felt like people with visible disabilities were treated better than they were. And I think there's been some other research, that's been done by other scholars where they've looked at that. Um, uh, and, so that I think would lend itself to another study. But that's one thing I thought, well, why aren't people with disabilities participating in this study? And then I thought, well, maybe they're not interested in participating because, they don't have any negative experiences on the job. And so, who are you going to hear from? You're going to hear from those individuals who've had these negative experiences and want to talk about those experiences. So yeah, that was, something that I thought about, just in terms of the fact that we didn't have individuals with obvious disabilities participating in our study. And our question was not, are you mistreated on the job? Our question was, how are you treated on the job?
Right.
Our recruitment, we, ask people that too.
Absolutely. Well, I think this has been such a rich discussion, very eye-opening, for, firsthand experiences, as well as we've seen lots more that could be discussed, or lots more that could kind of have some more attention put to it. So I think it's always wonderful where you can leave with an appetite to learn more, dig in more, experience more. So I thank you so much, Lynn, for bringing this research and this presentation forward to our audience today.
Okay, and thank you so much. And I really appreciate the great questions and comments from the audience.
Wonderful. Thank you again to our audience for participating. I'll just wrap with a couple of notes before we end for today. As a reminder, this session was recorded and will be sent through to participants along with the presentation materials. So all of those great additional resources we talked about will make sure get sent your way. And they will also be posted to our eCampus as well as a resource for access post this session. For our members, our Work Wellness Institute members, please remember that your free certificate will automatically get sent to you. And if that little sentence of free certificate perks your ears, please feel free to check out our workwellnessinstitute.org website and look to the Join Us membership section to learn all about what our membership offers, and perhaps even sign up today. Just for the moment, I will let you know as well that once our session ends, you will be directed to an evaluation survey, and we so appreciate you taking just those couple of minutes at the end to ensure that our resources and educational resources are always up to date and relevant and timely for our audience. Once again, our webinars and educational resources are created for public access and supported through memberships and funding sponsors. To visit our full programming, again, please go to that workwellnessinstitute.org and you can check out the section on courses. You can check out the section on resources to see all of the different ways that we are mobilizing that knowledge for our audience. And certainly we can look to the new year, as this is our last webinar for 2022, but we pick back up again in 2023, not only for webinars, but workshops. So we have our first one on January 25th at 10 a.m. surrounding chronic pain at work as the topic area, as well as a workshop on January 31st on the topic of recruiting and hiring people with disabilities. So hopefully we look forward to continuing learning together in the new year. And I'll just wrap once again with a very large thank you to you, our audience, as well as to our presenter, Dr. Lynn Cook today. And thank you sharing your expertise, and thank you to our audience for sharing our time together today. Have a great rest of the day, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you in the new year. Bye for now.